Sarah Reid, a 32-year-old black woman who died in Holloway Prison on January the 15th, 2015, having been arrested the previous October. Her life is one that demonstrates really the intersectionality of race, class and gender. And it points to the unique vulnerability of black women within the criminal justice system, particularly those who have mental health issues. Sarah was a beautiful young woman. She was loved and cared for by her family. She was reported to all who had met her to be a typical, insightful, charming, compassionate individual. In 2003, with her then partner, they had a child. That child was reported by her neighbours as crying all the time, and so the police were called. When they came and saw the child, they took the child into care on suspicion that the child had suffered some sort of abuse by her parents. Of course, nothing could be further than the truth. They later found out that the child suffered muscular atrophy, and as a consequence that gave urgent need to have medical attention. But it was too late for that baby. At 9 months old, they were taken into a hospice for the final days. Both Sarah and her partner went into that hospice, and the baby unfortunately passed away. After they left the hospice, they were dispatched in a taxi with the baby, the dead baby, in a blanket to go and find an undertaker's from a hospice in Beckton, East London, to Lewisham. By the time they reached Lewisham, the baby itself was secreting fluids, had become in a nightmarish situation in this cab, that the father and Sarah were completely and utterly distressed at what they saw, and her mental illness really started from there. She was in and out of hospital with various degrees of success in terms of her treatment, because like most black people, she had a deep mistrust of mental health provision. And in 2012, all of this was back and forth, and in 2012, while she was out in Oxford Street, she was subject to a horrendous beating by Metropolitan Police Officer PC James Kiddie, where she was stopped by a security guard on suspicion of shoplifting. The police were called, and he went into a back room and basically pummeled 5'7", 8.5 stone Sarah, broke 2 of her ribs. There was glass ornaments in the storeroom which smashed. Her back was slashed as a consequence, and she had to have major stitches in her back. Subsequently, that officer was sacked, but when he was charged with actual bodily harm, not grievous bodily harm. Actual bodily harm is me touching you. It's as simple as that. And he was given a sentence of 20 hours community service. Although he lost his job, which was fine, that's the level. If I break 2 of your ribs, or I broke 2 police officers' ribs, we wouldn't be charged with actual bodily harm. So after that, mental health deterioration began to get even worse, and she was in and out of mental health hospitals. In October, she was in one in Maudsley, and there is a trend within mental health hospitals of men sexually abusing women, particularly if they've had medication, because they're in a stupor and a torpor and not quite sure what's going on, and therefore men take advantage of that. I know an elderly white man took advantage of Sarah. She was subsequently conscious enough to deal with it and defended herself. The police were called, she was arrested. She's ended up now in Holloway Prison on remand. The court have asked for a fitness to plead report, because the magistrate, when he's putting her in remand, can see she's obviously distressed. That mental health report never came. And as a consequence, what should have been somebody on a remand who should have had visits every day, a phone call every day, never happened. She was assessed by the mental health team by a brother who looks like you and me, with dreadlocks all the way down his back, called Dr. Van Bull. And Dr. Van Bull determined that Sarah had no enduring mental health illness. So her psychotic drugs were removed, not scaled down, stopped. This meant that with her particular condition, she descended into a psychological and psychotic hell, a torment beyond belief. And if you heard the evidence that was being given at the inquest, which we sat through with the parents, and heard the detail of that descent, it's a madness which would consume, I think, all of us in an instant. Every time she displayed her psychotic attitudes, she was punished because she'd be determined not to be ill. So in the end, a psychotic, frail black woman was put in a segregation unit on basic. That means you can only come out yourself for 1 hour a day. She was deemed so dangerous by the prison authorities, she was on a 4-person unlock. That's reserved for people like Charles Manson, Al-Qaeda terrorists, Dr. Shipley, you name mass killers and murderers and psychotics, Ian Brady. These people have 4-person unlocks. That's 4 prison officers just to take you out yourself. So although she was allowed out of her cell an hour a day, they could never get the 4 officers all together at any one time to open it. That meant in the last few days of her life, she spent entirely by herself in that room, descending into a psychotic madness, which eventually led to her losing her life. And of course, in losing her life, there is contention, because the state's position is that she strangled herself while lying down on her bunk, not suspending it from anywhere, but literally tying something round her own neck, pulling it, and the ligature remaining there after she's passed unconscious, causing her to die. Now, of course, I've checked this out. There are only 10 cases, 5 of which are disputed, of self-strangulation in the entire criminal justice history of the United Kingdom and the United States. So it's a very, very rare thing to happen, and the family are deeply disputing this. But all of this would show you how a mental health provision in our prisons is appallingly bad. I think Judge Monday, just yesterday, put out a statement about a 17-year-old young woman who's being brutally failed by the mental health service, has tried to kill herself 112 times, and the judge put out the statement, which is unprecedented, saying the country and those responsible will have blood on their hands if this young woman is not found the appropriate mental health service treatment. And so it's regardless almost of race and ethnicity, it's poor people with mental health problems who are suffering deeply. Sarah passed away. We had the inquest. The inquest verdict said she killed herself when the balance of her mind was disturbed, and they gave a narrative verdict, which means a long script. And in that script, they castigated the prison, the mental health services, the police, the whole range of institutions who failed her. So I'm afraid that, like Awful Blackwood, like Ricky Bennett is the Stephen Lawrence of the mental health world. What happened to him is unbelievable. Again, another case people should look into and look up. But it's just a continual litany of failure in relation to criminal justice and black people. And a lot of it is focused around the issue of mental health. But I have to say, black women seem to be uniquely vulnerable to the most vicious